at the very end of the Roman Republic, Julius Caesar was the man in charge, and he was ultimately assassinated by Brutus and Cassius. After this assassination, a group of men, including Mark Antony, who was Caesar's lieutenant, a man named Lepidus, and another man not named Octavius or Octavian, who was Caesar's great nephew, set up the second triumvirate, and they ruled together for a while. But once Antony and Octavian needed no more help from the Senate, they betrayed Lepidus and kicked him out of this alliance. What happened then was that Octavian ruled the western part of the empire, and Antony ruled the eastern provinces. While ruling in the east, Antony became involved with Cleopatra, fell in love with her, and this story is recorded over and over in literature, including Shakespeare. In any case, Octavian took advantage of the relationship between Antony and Cleopatra and accused Antony of disloyalty to Rome. This caused, obviously, great tension between the two men, and ultimately in 31 BC, we had the Battle of Actium. In the Battle of Actium, Octavian defeated the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra and proclaimed himself emperor. When he did this, he changed his name to Augustus. Now, Augustus officially became emperor in 27 BC and ruled until 14 AD. When he took over, the economy was a mess, the political system was a mess, but by the time of his death, Rome had changed. Rome had become prosperous again. Rome was at peace. And under Augustus, there was also great cultural achievement. The art and the literature production increased, and it tended to become official and public and a service to the state. And it often echoed Augustus's politics and values of peace, simplicity, importance of agriculture, and of course, world domination. Augustus was in charge of everything, and he controlled everything. He established a new political order in which he was at the top of it, and everyone answered to him. He created a huge civil service and did some significant reform within the army. The army began to be respected again. They were tasked with guarding the frontiers, helping people plant crops, and helping build roads. Many Romans then and historians now see this period in which Augustus was emperor as Rome's golden age. And even though he was incredibly successful, he still exhibited that duty-bound idea of that so many Romans held: loyalty to country, loyalty to their duty to make their country better. And at the very end of his life, he asked this question: have I played my part well enough? And many, many people believe that yes, indeed, he did. I want to point out to you a very important piece of sculpture that is significant during this Augustan period. And it's called the Altar of Peace. And Augustus had this built, and interestingly, he didn't dedicate it to a god, nor did he dedicate it to himself, but to the value that he held so dearly, and that was peace itself. So if you look at it, you can see the dates here that it took to be constructed. And this is, what you see. And some of the storylines on this altar I want to discuss with you a little bit. First is you get Augustus as Aeneas, and we will talk about Aeneas and his importance to Rome and Rome's very, very famous epic called the Aeneid. But in any case, on this altar, Augustus is represented as Aeneas, as the person, according to the great Roman epic, as the person who founded Rome itself. And so you have, in another situation on the altar, a procession with Augustus leading. And he isn't made to look any more important or special than the folks following him. He looks like everybody else, and that was important to him. He wanted to be considered a first among equals. There is also a representation of the earth goddess. Augustus had a very strong belief in agriculture, in the importance of farming, and the people of the empire being able to feed themselves. You also will find the goddess of war. After all, he believed, though peace was important, that he must be ever vigilant to guard against those that might try to attack the Roman Empire. His family is also depicted, and he was very, very concerned about succession. Who would replace him after he died? And he was rightfully so concerned, and power after Augustus's death passed reluctantly to Tiberius, who was Augustus's stepson. And indeed, this became the problem. This problem with succession for an imperial state was significant. And Rome, after Augustus, had a series of emperors. Some were great, some were horrible, some were brutal, some were just flat out crazy. But they were constantly looking over their shoulder to find out who might assassinate them, sort of who was waiting in the wings. So the empire was never as stable as it was under the years of Augustus. Now, great architecture happened during the years of the empire. Many, many public and private buildings were constructed, and Roman imperial architectural achievements are important. It's grand. And three of the most important elements of imperial architecture were the arch, the barrel vault, and the dome. But some of the things that were built during this time, many bathhouses, corporate public places, similar to spas today, theaters, racetracks, libraries, aqueducts to get water from one part to another, and street drains. Very advanced architecturally. And you can see here the arch and the dome that appeared so often on imperial architecture. Now, we've talked about Doric capitals, we've talked about Ionic capitals, but the Corinthian capital came about during this imperial period. And you can see the much, much more decorated capitals here in these Corinthian buildings. This is the Pantheon. This is a classic example of imperial architecture. Like Greek architecture, the proportions are carefully calculated. The height of the dome from the ground is exactly equal to its width. Again, you can divide this building in half. It's a mirror image. These are some of the elements they took from the Greeks. But this whole dome concept is definitely Roman. And you can see the Corinthian capitals at the top of the Pantheon. And this is just an inside view of it. Again, you see the Corinthian capitals inside as well. Now, I mentioned Virgil briefly when we were talking about the altar of peace. And Virgil was one of the writers that was very active during Augustus's reign. And many of his works echo Augustus's values: peace, the importance of agriculture, simplicity, and the belief in Rome's destiny as world ruler. let's talk about 3 important works of Virgil. The Bucolics. The Bucolics were pastoral poems, joys and sorrows of the country, of shepherds, of a simple sort of life that Augustus valued. The Georgics were interesting in that they were didactic poems on farming. They were sort of how-to books. And they don't sugarcoat farming life. They talk about its difficulty, but they stress its importance. And again, this was a value that Augustus held dear. It was important to him to communicate to people the necessity of them growing their own food and being able to feed themselves. Now, the Aeneid. The Aeneid was Rome's epic. Just like the Iliad and the Odyssey were Greece's epics, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Epic of the Mesopotamians, the Aeneid was it for Rome. And it was most likely commissioned by Augustus, and it does follow those Greek models. The hero, Aeneas, is from Troy, and he is called by the gods, so the story goes, to leave Troy and found a new state, and that new state is Rome. Aeneas finds neither love nor peace. He is just driven on to found his city. Now you will read part of probably one of the most talked about books of the Aeneid, and that's book 4, in which we find out about Aeneas's love of Dido, who is the queen of Carthage. And he is madly in love with Dido. She's madly in love with him. She wants him to stay with her in Carthage and give up his quest to found Rome. And as you read, you can find out what choice he makes, because the choice he makes is significant. Aeneas is supposed to be the prototype of the ideal ruler who sublimates his own happiness and his own needs to those of his people. He is devoted to duty, and he fights for the future of Rome, not for himself. And so, as you read the book 4 and think about it, one of the lingering questions that people have about the Aeneid is greatness, is political greatness worth the sacrifice of self and the sacrifice of those that are loved? Now, Virgil wasn't the only writer of this period. You had many writers out there writing satire. Satire in which people are poking fun at problems with the metropolis. Problems of overcrowding, of noise, of traffic. The average Roman lived in an apartment block, and there were 45,000 of those blocks in the city of Rome itself. So we get satires of the problems that we saw in Rome. Now, one of the most famous satirists of the period was a man named Juvenal. And Juvenal is considered to be Rome's greatest satirist. He spares no one. He attacks, makes fun, and points out the problems that he sees around him. He wrote 16 satires, and among the themes of those satires are corruption and decadence, greed and meanness, women. Scathing satires about women and prostitutes, both male and female, homosexuals, and city life. He attacked everybody. And Juvenal, along with another satirist named Horace, began a genre that we still see today. Saturday Night Live is classic satire. Most stand-up comics are satirists, as they are poking fun of the social problems or the social issues that they see around them.